Hey everyone. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most fascinating and, let's be honest, controversial figures in all of history, Moses. We are going to count down the top 10 archaeological finds that really seem to shed some light on his life and the story of the Exodus. All right, let's jump right in.
So, right off the bat, the big question is this. Is the story of Moses and the Exodus actual history, or is it a foundational myth? A lot of scholars today are pretty skeptical, and they'll point out that there's no direct proof. But, as you're about to see, finding the evidence requires a little bit of detective work.
Okay, but before we even start looking, we gotta be clear on what we can realistically expect to find. Archaeology isn't magic. For one thing, Egyptian pharaohs just didn't record their defeats. They were never gonna carve, "We lost our entire slave workforce and our army got drowned" into a temple wall. It wasn't gonna happen. And think about it. A huge group of nomads wandering the desert for 40 years, they aren't building cities and leaving tons of pottery behind. So we have to be realistic. We're not looking for a sign that says Moses was here. We have to look for indirect, circumstantial evidence that all points in the same direction.
All right, the second thing we absolutely need is a timeline. I mean, if you're digging in the wrong century, you're obviously not going to find anything, right? And the Bible itself actually gives us a really specific anchor point in this verse from 1 Kings. It gives us a date that we can work backward from. So, when you do the math based on that biblical timeline, you land on a pretty specific date for the Exodus, somewhere around 1446 BC. That's the 15th century BC. So that's our time period. That's where we're going to focus our search for Moses and the Israelites in Egypt. With that locked in, let's begin the countdown. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a discovery that tackles a really fundamental question. Could Moses have even written the first 5 books of the Bible in his time? For the longest time, a lot of critics would say, hey, the whole thing's impossible because there wasn't even an alphabet for him to write with.
But then, boom! Early in the 20th century, archaeologists discovered the Proto-Semitic script. It's one of the earliest alphabets ever found. And get this, it was found right there in the Sinai Peninsula, at an old Egyptian turquoise mine.
You can't overstate how huge this was. These inscriptions, they date from the 19th all the way down to the 15th centuries BC. That's our exact window. And it was developed by Semitic-speaking people from Canaan who were working in Egypt. This provides a perfectly plausible script that a highly educated Hebrew living in Egypt, someone just like Moses, could have used. So that old argument that there was no alphabet, yeah, it just completely falls apart. Coming in at number 9. This piece of evidence isn't carved in stone, it's actually woven right into the words of the Bible itself. We're talking about linguistic fingerprints left at the scene of the crime, so to speak. You see, the book of Exodus is just sprinkled with what are called Egyptian loanwords. These are words that aren't actually Hebrew, they're borrowed directly from the Egyptian language, which strongly suggests the author knew Egypt like the back of his hand. Okay, let's just take the famous story of baby Moses. The Hebrew word they use for his basket, it's actually Egyptian. The word for the reeds on the riverbank, that's an undisputed Egyptian word. Even the word for river, it's not the normal Hebrew word for river. It's a direct transliteration of the Egyptian word for the Nile. You have to ask yourself, how would a writer, say 1,000 years later in Babylon, know to pepper the text with these super specific, authentic details? All right, let's move on to number 8. This one tackles an even more basic question. Is there any evidence that people we might call Hebrews were ever even in Egypt to begin with? Well, check this out. This is the Papyrus Brooklyn. It's basically a list of household servants from Egypt's 13th dynasty, which is not long after the time of Joseph. And what's just mind-blowing is that a whole bunch of these servants have Semitic names, and some of them are specifically Hebrew. We find Menahema, which is a form of the biblical name Menahem. Another name is a parallel to Issachar, one of Jacob's sons. And then, unbelievably, one of the servants is named Shiphrah, the exact same name as one of the heroic Hebrew midwives from the book of Exodus. What are the odds?
Okay, for number 7, let's talk about the slavery itself. The book of Exodus gets really specific about the kind of forced labor the Israelites had to do. So the question is, did those details actually match what we know from Egyptian history? The answer is a resounding yes. You're looking at a famous painting from the tomb of an Egyptian vizier named Rekhmire. And what does it show? It shows Asiatic slaves, which is what Egyptians called people from Canaan, making mud bricks. We also have Egyptian documents that confirm straw was used to bind the bricks together. And other papyri even mention strict brick quotas and complain about how hard it was to find enough straw. Every single detail lines up perfectly with the description in Exodus. At number 6, we're zooming in on the location. The Bible says the Israelites lived in a region called Ramesses. Well, excavations at a site called Tel El-Daba have uncovered a history that is just wow. It lines up incredibly well with the biblical story.
Okay, so the original city here was called Avaris. And just look at this timeline. It was founded way back in the 19th century BC by, you guessed it, Semitic people from Canaan, just like Jacob and his family. Later, during the time of Joseph, archaeologists found the remains of a palace and a statue belonging to a high-ranking Semitic official. But here's the real kicker. In the 15th century BC, right around our date of 1446 BC, during the reign of a pharaoh named Amenhotep II, the city is just suddenly abandoned. The people are gone. The elite archaeologist even suggested something like a plague might have been the cause.
All right, we've hit the top 5. This is where things get really interesting. Our number 5 discovery is all about the man on the other side of the story, Pharaoh. Based on our 1446 BC date, one specific ruler comes into focus, and his historical profile is a fascinating match for the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
Let's put these two profiles side by side. The biblical Pharaoh ruled during our time frame, and so did Amenhotep II. The Bible says Pharaoh's firstborn son died in the final plague. Well, guess what? Amenhotep II himself was not the firstborn son of his father, which means he only became Pharaoh because his older brother died. On top of that, Amenhotep's own successor was also not his firstborn son. And then there's the lost labor force. You'd be desperate, right? Well, in one of his last military campaigns, Amenhotep II boasts of capturing an unprecedented 101,000 captives. That number is just astronomical, way more than usual. It's exactly what you'd expect from a king in a panic trying to replenish his workforce.
Coming in at number 4 is an absolutely incredible artifact. It's basically an ancient Egyptian map, carved right into stone, that gives us amazing insight into the geography of the Exodus route.
Okay, so this is the Seti I War relief. See this heavily fortified road right here? That's the Horus Way, the main road into Canaan. And the Bible specifically says God led the Israelites the long way around to avoid war. This relief shows you exactly why. It was a military superhighway. But maybe the most amazing part is this waterway over here on Egypt's eastern border. It's labeled the Dividing Water, and it's full of reeds. This is just a stunning visual of what the Bible calls Yam Suf, which literally translates to the Reed Sea.
All right, we've made it. The top 3. And these are the heavy hitters. We're talking about 3 ancient inscriptions that actually mention Israel, or even the God of Israel, Yahweh, by name, outside of the Bible. Okay, let's run through them. At number 3, we have the Soleb inscription from around 1400 BC. That's just one generation after the Exodus. It talks about the land of the Shashu of Yahweh, which shows that Pharaoh knew about people who worshipped Yahweh in Canaan right at that time. Number 2 is the Berlin pedestal. Many scholars now date this to the 15th century BC, and it refers to a group in Canaan called Israel. Sound familiar? And finally, number 1, the big one, the famous Merneptah stele from about 1208 BC. This contains the first undisputed, universally accepted mention of Israel outside the Bible. It's a victory monument that brags, Israel is wasted, its seed is not. This proves that by the 13th century, Israel was a known, established nation in Canaan, which makes perfect sense if they'd left Egypt a couple centuries before. So let's step back for a second and look at the whole picture. What does all this suggest? Look, is any single one of these a smoking gun with Moses' signature on it? No, of course not. That's not how this kind of history works. But what we have is a powerful and compelling matrix of circumstantial evidence. We have the right script at the right time, with authentic linguistic clues at the right location, with accurate details about slavery, a plausible pharaoh, and extra-biblical mentions of Israel. It all converges on the same time and the same place described in the Bible. In the end, what all this material we've looked at today really does is show that the biblical story is historically plausible. It fits within the world we know from archaeology. The writers of the New Testament certainly saw the story of Moses as real history. They drew a straight line from his writings to the person of Jesus, leaving us with this really provocative thought from Jesus himself to consider. It's about the deep connection between trusting that historical record and the faith that was ultimately built on it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.